My name is Alice, and of course I knew that my family was far from perfect, but to turn everything into chaos like this, at the most important moment of my life? I tightened my grip on the phone, feeling a surge of irritation. What did you say? I asked, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. Well, Aunt Clara told me that your mother said that. Rachel's voice trembled, as if she was afraid I wouldn't like what she was going to say next. That you and Tom broke up. That the engagement was cancelled. My heart skipped a beat and then started racing. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, hoping that this was just a ridiculous mistake, some terrible misunderstanding that was about to be resolved. But even without opening my eyes, I already knew it wasn't a mistake. It's my mother's doing. Of course, who else could have thwarted my plans so easily and without the slightest remorse? Rachel, listen, my voice sounded strained, but I tried to stay calm despite the storm of emotions inside. That's not true. Tom and I never broke up. The party is not cancelled. Who even said that? Your mom. She called my mom last night, and then Grandma, and then Aunt Jennifer. In general, all the relatives are now sure that there will be no wedding. I felt like everything was boiling inside of me. It wasn't just ignoring my feelings, it wasn't just preferring Emily, it was deliberately destroying my happiness. How could she? Not just to ask to postpone the evening, but to announce to the whole world that my engagement is off. Rachel, thank you for telling me. I'll figure it out. I hung up the call before I could hear her answer, and stood up from the couch, feeling like I was getting angry. I went into the bedroom, where Tom was still dozing, moving weakly under the warm blanket. He looked so calm, so confident that the world around him was stable and reliable. It suddenly became unbearably painful for me just to think that my family could destroy this too. Tom, I said, touching his shoulder and giving him a little shake. He slowly opened his eyes, looked at me, and immediately frowned. What happened? I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling anger mixed with helplessness. My mom. She announced to everyone that we had broken up. She said there would be no wedding. Tom sat up abruptly, his face frozen in an expression of anger and bewilderment. What? He ran a hand through his hair, clearly trying to control his emotions. But why? Why would she do that? Because, apparently, Emily's party is more important than my happiness, I smiled bitterly, lowering my head. Because that's how it's always been. Tom clenched his fists, his jaw tensed. I could see that he was barely restraining himself from saying something too rude about my mother. And, to be honest, I would understand him. I wanted to say everything I think myself. But one thing I knew for sure, I wouldn't let that happen. I won't let her ruin my day, my plans, my life. We're not canceling anything, Tom said firmly, taking my hand in his. And we won't let anyone decide for us. I smiled weakly. He was right. Then I need to make some calls, I said, getting to my feet. We'll take care of everything. I left the room, feeling my resolve flare up inside. If my mother thought she could just rewrite my story, she was sorely mistaken. The morning began with a dull ringing in my head, as if thoughts, like heavy stones, were rolling inside, giving me no peace. I barely opened my eyes, and the first thing I did was check my phone. The screen was flashing with dozens of notifications, messages, missed calls, comments under my post. People were surprised, apologized, asked if it was true. Someone wrote that he had already managed to arrange with the nanny for the children. Someone complained that he had canceled his plans, believing my mother's words. It was like a storm that couldn't be contained. Tom was still asleep, his breathing was even and calm, but it seemed to me that even in his sleep his thoughts were churning just like mine. I carefully slipped out from under his arm, sat up on the bed and took a deep breath. No, I'm not going to let my mother take this day away from me. I deserve it. I deserve to come first, at least once in my life. I dialed the number. The signal went off. 1, 2, 3. And finally, a familiar, cold voice. Alice, I'm busy. Really? I felt the blood pounding in my temples. You weren't too busy when you decided to cancel my engagement and announce to everyone that I broke up with Tom. There was silence. But I knew her too well. This silence did not mean remorse. It did not even mean surprise. It was the silence of a man who has already thought everything out and stands firm on his own. It was necessary, she finally said, as if it were some harmless thing, like changing restaurants for dinner. Emily deserves to have her family with her at this important moment. I felt the air constrict my lungs. And me, Mom? My voice was trembling, not from weakness, but from suppressed rage. Do I deserve anything? Or do you think my engagement is just another inconvenience that can be eliminated from the schedule if Emily gets a reason to throw a party? She sighed heavily, as if I was the one being an unreasonable child who didn't understand the obvious. Alice, don't be selfish. We are all proud of you, but understand that your sister has the only chance to celebrate her success. I smiled bitterly. The only chance? Are you serious? And the 3 days of her birthday celebration? And the time when you rented a country house in honor of her graduation? Or should I remind you how you completely forgot about my 16th birthday because you were too busy planning her graduation? Alice, that's enough. No, Mom, that's enough. I hardly recognized my own voice. It was filled with emotions that I had been hiding inside for so long. You didn't just not support me, you tried to destroy what is important to me. You put your pet above me, as always. But you know what? I won't let you do it this time. You're exaggerating, she replied evenly. Anyway, everyone is already going to Emily's party. Why make a drama out of it? Drama? Do you call this a drama? You just announced that I was no longer engaged, and you didn't even think about how I felt. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I didn't let the tears get the better of me. But if you think I'm just going to put up with it, you're wrong. The party will take place. Tom and I will be there. And if someone in the family cares more about Emily's career than my happiness, they can stay at home. Mom sighed heavily, and for a moment I thought I heard doubt in her voice, but it quickly disappeared. Do as you want, her voice turned icy again. But don't expect me to support you. I chuckled. Oh, don't worry, Mom. I haven't been expecting her for a long time. I dropped the call and immediately felt tired. I clutched the phone in my hand and closed my eyes. Everything that I once felt about my family seemed to fall apart. How did it go? Tom's voice was low, but there was concern in it. I didn't notice when he woke up, but he was already sitting on the bed, watching me. I looked at him and shrugged my shoulders. She hasn't changed her mind. Tom nodded, as if he had expected this. Then we'll just do it without them. I took a deep breath, feeling a new resolve flare up somewhere in my chest. Yes, we will do it without them. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my stomach was clenching with anxious anticipation. All day long, I tried not to think about who exactly would show up at our party and who would choose my mother and Emily's side, but now, as Tom and I approached the decorated room, that became the only thought that bothered me. I could already hear voices, laughter, and the muffled sounds of music inside, and I knew there was no turning back. Tom squeezed my hand, which was warm, firm, and reliable, and looked at me with a confidence that took my breath away. It's going to be okay, he said, leaning toward me so that I could hear him even over the noise. We did everything we could. Now just enjoy the moment. I nodded, but a hurricane was raging inside me. We opened the doors, and I froze for a moment, peering into the crowd. Were they enough? I noticed Rachel's cousin, who waved at me, her parents, several friends, and Tom's colleagues. Do I see Aunt Marge? Yes, here she is, standing to the side, talking to someone, and her gaze immediately catches mine, and she smiles. So she kept her word and helped fix the situation. But what I don't see are my parents and Emily. I wasn't sure if I was expecting them to show up or if, on the contrary, I was hoping that they would stay at home, at their alternative party, but I still felt a strange emptiness in my chest. They didn't come. They chose Emily. Again. Tom felt my tension and, without saying a word, led me inside. We were immediately surrounded by guests, congratulations, hugs, kind words, glasses of champagne in our hands began. I tried to smile and sincerely thank them, but somewhere in the depths of my soul, something kept pulling me back to thoughts of my mother, my sister, and the fact that they didn't even bother to show up and at least pretend to be happy for me. But then I heard someone's voice, and it made me turn around. Alice. I froze. It was Grandma. I hadn't expected to see her. I wasn't sure if she even knew about the situation, but here she stood in front of me, short but statuesque, with a piercing gaze that hadn't lost any of its power over the years. I was confused, but she just squeezed my hand in her wrinkled but still strong fingers. Did you really think I'd missed this? There was a slight reproach in her voice, but also a warm note, as if she had forgiven me in advance for all the thoughts I might have had. I swallowed. I just didn't know you were coming. Mom. I know what Mom said, she interrupted me. I know what she was doing. But, Alice, you have to understand one simple thing. Her decisions are her decisions. And they are not always correct. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Did you know? Grandma nodded slightly. I didn't interfere because I was waiting for you to do it. And I'm proud of you, girl. You didn't let anyone take this day away from you. I took a deep breath, feeling for the first time all evening that maybe I really wasn't alone. At that moment, Tom came up to us. He greeted Grandma with a smile, and she looked at him searchingly, as if assessing whether he was worthy of me. So you're the Tom? She asked. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Good, she said, nodding her head approvingly. Then let's start this celebration for real. I smiled, genuinely for the first time all day. I felt my insides tighten, as if an icy hand had gripped my heart in a steel grip. My chest tightened with a mixture of anger and pain, but my voice remained steady, though taut as a string. It's a great way to start a conversation, Mom, I replied dryly, trying not to betray in my voice the storm of emotions that swirled inside. I see you're still angry. Angry? Her voice rose to a screech, and I pulled the phone away from my ear, fearing she was about to deafen him. You destroyed Emily. You've disgraced our family. I can't believe you were so selfish as to pull this farce knowing your sister had an important day. I took a deep breath, gripping the phone tighter. Tom was sitting next to me, watching me intently, and one look into his eyes was enough for me to understand that he was here. He was next to me, and I no longer had to fight it alone. I didn't destroy Emily, I said carefully. She got her promotion, no one fired her, her life went on, but it turns out you didn't care about my engagement at all. You didn't even congratulate me. She didn't even write. You just decided that you could make me not exist, like you've been doing all my life. But you know what, Mom? It won't work anymore. Don't you dare talk to me like that. Her voice was shaking with anger, but now I could hear something new behind that anger, a note of confusion. I'm your mother. I know what's best for you. And you. You chose some guy instead of your family. I've chosen someone who really loves me, I said firmly. I chose myself, Mom. There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. It seemed to me that she was going to hang up, but then I heard her restrained, icy voice. So you're not part of the family anymore? I smiled, but there was no joy in that smile. just tired and relieved that I no longer have to fight for her acceptance. If family is you and Emily, if family is the eternal belittling of me and my feelings, then yes, Mom, I'm not a part of it anymore. You're going to regret this, Alice, she hissed. When everything goes wrong, when he abandons you, you will crawl back, but it will be too late. I didn't answer. I just pressed the end of call button and closed my eyes. I felt Tom gently take the phone from my fingers and put it away. Is everything okay? What is it? He asked softly. I looked at him and suddenly felt the weight that I had been carrying for too long falling off me. Yes, I breathed. Now, yes. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear, and felt a wave of conflicting emotions rising inside me. My grandmother's words contained the same endless love that I had been used to since childhood, but there was also something else that I didn't want to hear. A call for reconciliation, as if I should forget everything that happened, pretend that nothing happened, just because the family should stick together. Grandma, I understand that you want us all to make up, I said slowly, choosing my words, but you know that this is not just a one-time quarrel. This is not an accident, not a mistake, but a conscious choice on their part. They chose to exclude me, they chose to humiliate me, they chose to turn my happiness into another battlefield, and now that their plan didn't work out, do you want me to just forget about it? Alice, her voice sounded pleading, I'm not saying that you should forget, but maybe give them a chance. People sometimes make mistakes, say things that they later regret. I smiled bitterly. Grandma, if it was one mistake, I would understand, but it's not a mistake, it's a pattern that they've been repeating for years. Don't you remember what it was like when I was a teenager? Don't you remember all those times when I stayed away because Emily had more important moments? It's not a spontaneous act, it's a way of thinking that they don't want to change. She paused, and I heard her sigh softly. It hurt me to talk like that to someone who had always been on my side, but I couldn't betray myself for the sake of her desire to see our family united when this unity existed only at my expense. I understand, she finally said, and her voice sounded sad. It's just. I'm sorry that everything turned out this way. Me too, Grandma, I answered honestly. We said goodbye, and I slowly put the phone down on the table, feeling tired, which was deeper than physical. Tom, who had been sitting next to me all this time, silently watching me, gently covered my hand with his. Are you okay? I nodded, but there was still a heaviness in my chest. Yes. I'm just tired. He squeezed my fingers lightly, and that touch was enough to make me feel a little better. You don't have to do what others want, he said softly. Even if it's your family. I looked at him and smiled faintly. I know. But do you know what the scariest thing is? Part of me still wants to believe that one day they will change. That one day they will admit that they did wrong. Tom shook his head. Maybe. Or maybe they'll never change. The important thing is, are you ready to let them hurt you again, hoping that one day they will understand? I thought about it. It was a question that I didn't have a ready answer to. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone in my hands, and stared at the screen, where new messages flashed one after another, full of anger, reproaches, accusations. Their words seemed to burn through my fingers, leaving behind not pain, not resentment, but some kind of strange, cold indifference. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like making excuses, trying to explain that I wasn't trying to frame them at all, that I just wanted Grandma to find out the truth. But was I even a little sorry? No. Not at all. The phone vibrated again, and I saw that Mom was no longer satisfied with the messages. Now she was calling. Her name flashed on the screen, and I could almost hear her angry voice in my head, full of contempt intonation. A few weeks ago, I would have automatically responded, cowering inwardly, waiting for the next accusations. But now I just watched as the phone kept ringing until the screen went off, and then lit up again, a new call. this time from my father. I clicked reject. There was silence in the room, filled only with my own breathing. I expected to feel fear or guilt, but instead a strange calm spread over me. Are they angry? Sure. Do they think I'm a traitor? Maybe. But to be honest, I betrayed this family not now, but much earlier, at the moment when I decided to choose myself, when I refused to let them put me in second place over and over again. And you know what? I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Are you okay? Tom appeared in the doorway, his voice cautious, but there was no doubt in his eyes, only boundless support. I looked at him, still holding the phone in my hands, as if hesitating to put it aside, but then I sighed, turned off the sound and put it face down on the bedside table. Yes, I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that it was true. They found out about the recording, now they're shouting that I betrayed my family. Tom frowned, but sat down next to me and put his arm around my shoulders. They're just mad because you finally told the truth. I nodded, looking out the window. The morning sun was slowly rising behind the glass, flooding the room with a soft golden light, and it suddenly seemed to me that this day would be something special. The day when I finally let go of everything that was pulling me back. Yes, I said. They're angry. But, you know, Tom, I'm not afraid anymore. I was sitting at the table, looking at the long list of names in front of me, and I felt a strange, ambivalent feeling rising inside. Excitement? Sure. It was my wedding day, the one I had dreamed of, that Tom and I had talked about so much, that we had been planning for so long. But along with the joy, something else settled in my heart: uncertainty, a slight chill on the back of my neck, tension that I couldn't ignore. Because there were those on this list who probably shouldn't have been. Well, what do you say? Tom asked, looking at the sheet and noticing my doubt. Who are we crossing out? I smiled, but it was a weak smile. Oh, don't start, he chuckled softly, but there was understanding in his eyes. I know that look. It's your family again, isn't it? I sighed, putting down my pen and rubbing my temples. Tom, I do not know, I said honestly. We've been through so much, and to be honest, I don't want to ruin my wedding. But can I really not invite them? He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. Of course you can. This is your wedding, and you have every right not to invite people you don't need. But this is my family. I ran my hand down the list, pausing at my parents' last name. No matter how much they make me angry, they are still my parents. Tom paused, then put his hand on top of mine, warm and secure. You know I don't want to put pressure on anyone, he said softly. But think about it this way. If they really cared about you, would you even have to think about whether to call them or not? Shouldn't they be the ones you want to be around that day without any doubt? I held my breath. He was right. Part of me knew that from the beginning, but it hurt too much to admit it to myself. I looked at the list. Parents. Emily. Some distant relatives who supported their side. I imagined them sitting at tables, cold, arrogant, full of judgment, looking for any excuse to ruin my day. Was it worth it? I took a pen and, taking a deep breath, began to cross it out. 1 name, 2, 3. Tom watched me in silence, but when I finished, he took my list, studied it, and nodded with a smile. An excellent choice. I didn't answer. I just felt like a rock was finally falling off my shoulders. The remaining months flew by like a whirlwind. Trying on dresses, rehearsing the ceremony, choosing the decor, seating the guests, all this whirlwind of wedding chores unexpectedly brought me joy. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of other people's expectations. This wedding was for me and Tom, not for anyone else. My friends and I laughed at the ridiculous bridesmaids' dresses that I rejected. Tom discussed the vows he was going to make with the best man, and my grandmother, beaming with happiness, enthusiastically helped me choose flower arrangements for the banquet. She's the only one in my family I really wanted to see there. But when the wedding was only a week away, something happened that I had secretly expected. My phone vibrated again, and when I looked at the screen, I saw the name I had been trying to ignore for so long. Mom. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone in my hand. Well, I muttered before hitting the answer button. Let's see what you have to say this time. At that moment, when Tom and I were dancing, I felt all the worries, doubts, and bitterness of the past dissolve in this magical evening, giving way to something brighter, deeper, present. The music flowed in soft waves, embracing us, and the warm light of lanterns hung all over the garden played in the eyes of the gathered guests, filling this evening with special comfort and joy. I glanced around the room and saw my grandmother sitting at our table and smiling at me with such warmth that my heart sank. She was the only person in my family who chose me, who was wise enough to see me for who I am and support me no matter what. I knew it wasn't easy for her. She dreamed of peace in her family, she wanted everything to be different, but that day she finally seemed to accept reality for what it is. Her hands were on the table, and on her wrist was an old but elegant silver bracelet chain, the one that was passed down in our family through the female line, from mother to daughter. It suddenly occurred to me that now she might one day pass to me, and then to my daughter, if we have one. Tom leaned toward me, his breath brushing my cheek. What are you thinking about? I looked at him, at his warm, attentive eyes, in which there was so much love that I was literally overwhelmed by a new wave of emotions. About how much I love you, I whispered, smiling. And that, perhaps for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm completely in my place. He gently touched my face, his fingers ran along the line of my cheekbone, and I realized that I would remember this moment forever. You've always been in your place, he replied. I just finally allowed myself to feel it. I squeezed his hand before he danced me around again. Somewhere to the side, I heard one of my bridesmaids laughing as she looked at my grandmother, who was trying to persuade the guests to try her homemade cookies, which she had smuggled into her bag. I could see Cousin Rachel deep in conversation with Tom's friends, and Uncle Joe was already telling some kind of joke, making our table laugh. The people around me were happy, and I knew that they were here not because it was necessary, not because the family should tolerate each other no matter what, but because they chose to be here, chose to be with me and Tom on this day. And if this is not a family, then I do not know what that word can even be called. I knew that somewhere out there, far from this room, my mother, father, and Emily were probably sitting together, discussing the evening, judging me, gloating, or, conversely, feeling some strange, unconscious regret. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care anymore. They made their choice, and I made mine. I chose love, I chose joy, I chose myself. The music slowed down, the dance ended, and Tom, without releasing his grip, leaned toward me, pressing his forehead against mine. Are you ready for a new chapter? I smiled, feeling a warm, enveloping feeling of happiness flare up in my chest. Yes, I replied, looking into his eyes. More than enough. And for the first time in a long time, I really meant it.